In terms of the global economy, the financial world, and central banks' monetary policy, we live in quite interesting and extreme times. As fiat money enters its final death throes before eventual collapse, I believe the central banks would try almost anything to keep the game going. This means the prospect of helicopter money becomes an increasingly likely outcome. Helicopter money was coined by Milton Friedman and made more famous in recent years by former chairman of the Fed, Bernanke, also called Helicopter Ben, for his views on this extraordinary monetary policy theory. Now, the theory is if you can put enough money into the system, you can stoke enough demand, and this would kickstart an economy that is suffering greatly. Helicopter money gets its name because in a hypothetical situation, you could fill a helicopter with money. You'd then fly this helicopter over a city, push the money out the back, and the citizens below would collect the money. They would spend this in the local economy, and it in theory would drive economic growth. Now, it's a very radical form of monetary policy, and one not many people up until now have taken that seriously. But when you look around the world and look at the tools that the central banks have already used, we've already used some pretty radical tools. When you look at quantitative easing, look at the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve owns around 10% of US government debt. Here in the UK, it's even larger. The Bank of England owns around a quarter of UK government debt. So a quarter of UK government bonds are owned by the Bank of England. This already is very radical times. When you look at interest rates, most central banks around the world have pushed interest rates to near zero. Some central banks are already experimenting with negative interest rates. When you look at bonds, most bond yields are near zero. Adjusted for inflation, nearly all bonds are negative in real terms, i.e. inflation is higher than the yield return you get on your bonds. So we already live in very extraordinary times in terms of the tools that the central banks are using. Factor in when the next recession comes along, which we're already overdue a recession. There probably will be a recession in the next 2 to 3 years. And that's even on the conservative side, may come sooner than that. What happens when the next recession comes? What tools do we have to actually fight this recession? Typically a recession comes along, central banks reduce interest rates to help drive the economy forward. Where can we go? We're already near zero. Yes, they could try and push interest rates even lower, negative, or even further into negative territory if the central banks are already negative. But how much does that really help? You get to a point where people just will stop using the monetary system, right? Because, if you hold money, you're just guaranteed to lose. So it starts pushing people even away from holding assets in like cash or the traditional system itself. People just look into other things, Bitcoin, gold. It will just basically drive people away from even using money. With the amount of QE we've already done, you get to a point where effectively the central bank may be the only owner of government bonds, especially here in the UK, already at a quarter. How high do you want the Bank of England to go? Do you want it to own half? Do you want it to own 3/4 of government debt? We get to a point where the private holders of bonds would just lose faith in the bond system. It will just be clear that the central bank is just going to be the buyer of last resort, which is basically just a nail in the coffin for the bond system. So where do we go next? I think helicopter money will be a possibility that the central banks will look at seriously for driving economic growth. Now, it's unlikely they'll actually use the helicopter model. That would be a very crude way of introducing the money into the system, but it could definitely be done through something like a tax rebate, or just sending every taxpayer in the system just a check. It could be £1,000, £2,000, whatever the central bank chooses, just to put money into the system to, in theory, drive economic growth. Other systems you could use, here in the UK, across the world, governments are being pressured into green initiatives, Green New Deals, etc. So you could have something, say you buy a electric car, maybe you're scrapping your old petrol car and you get an electric one. Maybe the government say, well, we'll pay 50%, right? So say it's a £40,000 electric car you want to buy. The government say, well, we'll pay half, we'll pay £20,000 and you pay the other £20,000. Maybe it could be through other green initiatives. You want to put solar panels on your house, the government would just pay for it, or we want to upgrade your boiler. So there's many ways that the government could look, or the central banks could look, to injecting this money into the economy. Now, will it actually work? I think you could, in theory, get some short-term boost to the economy. The real fear is it drives inflation. People that hold, UK cash. People who are just partaking in the system or own bonds. The fear is they just leave, they just flee, they put their money into other assets, because it is a real radical step to take, and ultimately it means the monetary system, fiat money itself, is on its final death throes, in my opinion. Once they get to this point, basically the system has very little time left anyway, so it could possibly even accelerate the collapse of fiat money. But it's a possibility when the stakes are this high and the central banks will do almost anything to keep the system going. Maybe it will work. I think an interesting thing to look at with helicopter money is, in my opinion, as crazy as it is, and we're getting to the point now where it will do nothing to save the system itself, compared to traditional radical forms of monetary policy like ultra low interest rates, like QE. I think in theory it's actually more ethical from my point of view. With just an interesting side note, when you conduct QE, the people that tend to benefit are, the banks, large financial institutions. They have they essentially sell bonds to the central bank, and the central bank gives them money. They benefit from that because they get the money first. So it's basically socialism for the rich. Again, with ultra low interest rates, corporations and people that can speculate can get cheap money and speculate into various asset classes. They do well. The interesting thing with helicopter money is actually just Joe average in the street that could be getting this money. So as an interesting side note, as crazy as helicopter money is, I think as an extreme form of monetary policy, it's probably more ethical, because QE, ultra low interest rates, tend to favor the rich, whereas helicopter money could benefit everybody in society. When I say benefit, I think it's just possibly a least bad option, right? I'd much rather just have sound monetary policy. But this is as crazy as times are now. Central banks possibly eyeing up the crazy idea of helicopter money. Let me know your thoughts and opinions on this. Is this something we'll ever see? I think it's possible, but when it happens, we're so deep now, so much QE's taken place, ultra low interest rates, it will do almost nothing to preserve the system. It may even accelerate the collapse of the fiat monetary system, as people just look around and just think the system has gone full crazy now. We're adopting helicopter money. So let me know your thoughts and opinions on this. Is this something we'll ever see? What do you think the timeline is now for fiat money? How long have we got before total system-wide collapse? Jason from Liberty Bunker signing off, and I'll see you in the next video.